Oh no, not him again. The rain hammered against the window like 1,000 urgent warnings, and Claire's coffee had gone cold in her trembling hand. There he was again, the boy. Fourth time this week. Same time. Same dumpster. Same heartbreaking routine that was tearing her apart from the inside. Not tonight, she whispered to herself, her breath fogging the glass. I can't just watch anymore. The boy, Marcus, she'd learned his name somehow, though they'd never spoken, moved with the precision of someone twice his age. His blazer's jacket hung off his thin frame, 2 sizes too big, soaked through and clinging to his small shoulders. He lifted the dumpster lid carefully, methodically, like he'd done this 100 times before. Maybe he had. Claire watched him pull out the wrapped Safeway sandwich she'd left that morning. He examined it under the amber parking lot light, turning it over in his small hands, checking for, what? Mold? Expiration dates? The weight of that caution made her chest tighten until she couldn't breathe. He tucked it into his Spider-Man backpack alongside bruised apples and a dented soup can. Everything organized. Everything purposeful. This wasn't desperation. This was survival with rules, patterns, discipline that no 10-year-old should possess. When Marcus zipped the backpack and turned towards Southeast Division Street, something inside Claire snapped. She'd been leaving food for a week, telling herself it was enough, that anonymous kindness counted for something. But watching him disappear into the rain-soaked darkness alone, a child carrying weight she couldn't begin to imagine, the distance between her warm apartment and his reality became unbearable. Claire grabbed her North Face jacket, her phone, her keys. Her hands shook as she locked the door behind her. She stepped into the rain and followed him into the Portland night, her heart pounding with equal parts terror and determination. She had no plan, no idea what she'd find, no comprehension of how this single decision, this one act of stepping out of her comfortable isolation, would shatter everything she thought she understood about kindness, sacrifice, and what it truly costs to help someone when the system has already failed them. To understand how Claire ended up following a child through the rain-soaked streets of Portland, risking everything for a family she didn't know, we have to go back to 2 months before that night. Back to when she first noticed Marcus and convinced herself that watching from a distance was enough. Before we get into that, here's a special shout-out to Marcus Tanaka watching from Sydney, Australia. Thank you for being one of our amazing supporters and engaging with the channel. A character in the story was named in your honor. If you'd also like to get a shout-out in the next video, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, and you'll be given a shout-out. Thank you. Now let's get into the story. 2 months earlier, Claire Donovan's life operated on a loop so predictable she could navigate it half asleep. Wake at 7. Coffee from the French press Trevor had left behind when he moved out. Laptop open by 8. Freelance graphic design work that paid well enough to afford her modest Southeast Portland apartment, but never quite enough to feel secure. Lunch around noon. Usually leftovers or something microwaved. More work. Maybe a walk if the Oregon rain held off. Dinner alone. Netflix. Bed by 11. It was a life of careful routines and minimal friction, which was exactly how Claire had designed it after Trevor walked out 3 months ago. You're going through the motions, he'd said, standing in her doorway with his last box of belongings tucked under one arm. You're physically here, Claire, but emotionally? You checked out a long time ago. She'd wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. She'd built a life that required nothing of her heart, and now she was living in the aftermath. On a Tuesday morning in early September, Claire sat at her usual corner table at Stumptown Coffee on Division Street, her laptop open to a logo redesign for a tech startup in Beaverton. The place hummed with the white noise of espresso machines and murmured conversations. Outside the window, Portland moved through its rhythms, cyclists weaving through traffic, a woman in a Patagonia jacket walking her golden retriever, a man holding a cardboard sign at the intersection. Homeless vet. Anything helps. God bless. Claire's eyes skimmed past him, then returned. She'd been noticing them more lately. Tents clustered under the Burnside Bridge. Sleeping bags in doorways on her morning walks. Panhandlers at every major intersection, their faces worn by weather and circumstance. The guilt crept in at the edges, sharp and uncomfortable, but she pushed it away like she always did. What was she supposed to do? She wasn't rich. She had her own problems. She dropped her gaze back to her laptop and kept working. That evening, Claire stopped at Fred Meyer on her way home, navigating the familiar aisles on autopilot. Pasta, marinara sauce, salad mix, a rotisserie chicken she'd eat over 3 days. At the register, she added a pack of gum she didn't need just to round out the total. Back at her apartment, she unpacked groceries in her small kitchen, the silence pressing against her like a physical weight. This was her life now. Comfortable, isolated, safe. And then she saw him. Movement outside her window caught her attention, a small figure moving near the dumpster in the parking lot below. Claire stepped closer to the glass, squinting through the early evening light. A boy, no older than 10, stood at the dumpster with his back to her. He wore an oversized jacket and moved quickly, efficiently, like he didn't want to be seen. He lifted the lid, peered inside, then reached in and pulled something out. A bag, maybe. Claire couldn't quite tell from 3 stories up. The boy tucked whatever it was into his backpack, glanced around nervously, then disappeared into the twilight. Claire stood frozen at her window. Her pulse inexplicably quickened. The whole encounter lasted maybe 30 seconds, but something about it lodged in her chest like a splinter. She told herself it was nothing. Kids did weird things. Maybe he was looking for something he'd thrown away by accident. Maybe it was a dare. Maybe it was none of her business. But the image stayed with her through dinner, through an episode of a show she couldn't focus on, through her restless attempt at sleep. The next morning, Claire threw away half a turkey sandwich from the deli at Fred Meyer. She wrapped it carefully in plastic wrap first, then placed it on top of the trash in her kitchen bin. When she took the bag downstairs to the dumpster, she hesitated, then deliberately set the wrapped sandwich on top of the other trash where it would be visible. Just in case, she muttered to herself, feeling ridiculous. She did it again 2 days later. Then again, a bagel with cream cheese, barely touched. An apple with 1 bite missing. A full container of pasta salad she'd bought, but decided she didn't want. Small gestures, she told herself. They didn't cost her anything, and if someone needed food, well, at least it wasn't going to waste. On Friday afternoon, Claire met her best friend Rachel at Pine State Biscuits for lunch. Rachel ordered the Reggie Deluxe and immediately started talking about her new boyfriend, some guy she'd met at a Powell's reading. Claire nodded along, offering the appropriate responses while her mind drifted elsewhere. "You're doing it again," Rachel said suddenly mid-bite. "Doing what?" "That thing where you're physically present but mentally checked out." Trevor was right about. Rachel stopped herself, wincing. "Sorry, that was harsh." "No, you're right." Claire poked at her biscuit sandwich. "I've just been distracted lately." "By what?" Claire hesitated, then told her about the boy at the dumpster. About the food she'd been leaving. About the strange pull she felt to do something, even if she didn't know what. Rachel set down her fork and studied Claire with an expression somewhere between concern and frustration. "You're performing kindness, not actually being kind." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means leaving food in a dumpster makes you feel better about yourself, but it doesn't actually change anything for that kid. You're doing the bare minimum so you can tell yourself you tried." The words hit like a slap. Claire wanted to argue, to defend herself, but once again, the words wouldn't come. Because Rachel was right. That night, Claire stood at her window and watched the dumpster below. The boy appeared at 6:47 p.m., right on schedule. She watched him retrieve the wrapped food she'd left that morning, examine it carefully, and tuck it into his backpack with movements so practiced they made her throat tight. When he disappeared into the evening, something inside her shifted, just a fraction, just enough to let the uncomfortable truth seep in. She couldn't keep doing this. Watching from a distance, performing kindness from 3 stories up, convincing herself that small gestures absolved her of any real responsibility. But she also didn't know what else to do. Have you ever noticed someone in need but convinced yourself that small gestures were enough? What made you finally step out of your comfort zone? Or are you still waiting? Share your story in the comments. Claire started keeping a notebook. Monday, 6:47 p.m. Wednesday, 6:47 p.m. Friday, 6:47 p.m. The boy appeared like clockwork, never early, never late. His routine, so precise it felt rehearsed. She'd positioned her desk near the window now, laptop angled, so she could work while keeping the dumpster in her peripheral vision. It became an obsession she couldn't name. On a Sunday afternoon, Claire sat on her couch with her laptop balanced on her knees, typing "Food Insecurity, Portland, Oregon" into Google. The results made her stomach twist. 1 in 8 Oregonians struggled with hunger. Portland's cost of living had increased 42% in the last decade, while wages stagnated. And then she found the neighborhood forums. Riverside Apartments off Powell. Anyone know what's happening there? One post read. The replies painted a grim picture. New ownership. Rent increases. Week-to-week leases for families who couldn't afford security deposits elsewhere. It's where people go when they run out of options, someone wrote. Claire clicked through Street View images of the building. Peeling paint. Sagging porches. Windows covered with makeshift curtains. She wondered if that's where the boy lived, if that's where he was taking the food she left. 2 weeks before the rain-soaked night that would change everything, Claire made a decision that terrified her. When the boy appeared at 6:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, she grabbed her jacket and followed. Her heart hammered as she descended the stairs of her building and stepped into the October evening. The boy was already half a block ahead, his small figure silhouetted against the glow of streetlights. Claire kept her distance, her hands shoved deep in her pockets, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, invasive, creepy. He walked with purpose through southeast Portland, past the Stumptown she frequented, past the 7-Eleven on the corner, turning onto Powell Boulevard. Claire's pulse quickened. He was heading toward the Riverside Apartments. When the boy reached the building's entrance, a heavy door with peeling green paint and a broken intercom, Claire stopped. She stood on the opposite side of the street, watching him disappear inside, and suddenly the full weight of what she was doing crashed over her. She was following a child who didn't know her, a child who might be frightened if he realized someone was tracking him. Claire turned around and walked home, shame burning hot in her chest. That night, she called her father. "How's the freelance work going?" Robert Donovan asked, his voice warm but tired. "Fine. Same as always." "You sound distracted." Claire hesitated, then told him about the boy, about the food she'd been leaving, about the strange pull she felt to do more but didn't know how. Her father was quiet for a long moment. "You know what your problem is, Claire? I'm sure you're about to tell me. You've spent your whole life playing it safe. Safe job, safe relationship, safe apartment. And now you're watching someone else's crisis through a window because actually getting involved would require you to risk something." The words stung because they were true. "What am I supposed to do, Dad? I can't just." "You can," he interrupted gently. "You just won't. There's a difference." After they hung up, Claire sat in the dark of her apartment, her father's disappointment echoing in her head like an accusation. The next day, she went to Subway and bought 3 turkey and cheese sandwiches. Wrapped, sealed, safe to eat. At Fred Meyer, she picked up apples, bananas, and canned soup, Progresso, the kind with actual vegetables. At Trader Joe's, she loaded her cart with granola bars, string cheese, and juice boxes. She wasn't leaving scraps anymore. She was leaving meals. On Friday evening, Claire did something she would later recognize as the moment her curiosity turned into something darker. She pulled out a pair of binoculars her ex-boyfriend had left behind, meant for birdwatching hikes they'd never taken, and positioned herself at the window. At 6:47 p.m., the boy appeared. Claire adjusted the focus, her hands trembling slightly. Through the lenses, she could see him clearly now. The oversized blazer's jacket, the Spider-Man backpack, the careful way he lifted the dumpster lid and retrieved the items she'd left. But what happened next made her breath catch. The boy didn't immediately leave. Instead, he set his backpack on the ground, unzipped it, and began organizing. He placed the sandwich in one compartment, the canned goods in another, the fruit carefully arranged so nothing would bruise. Everything had a place. Everything had a system. This wasn't desperation. This was practice. Routine. Survival with rules developed over weeks or months of necessity. Claire lowered the binoculars, her chest tight. She'd been telling herself she was helping, but watching him now, seeing the methodical care he took, the burden evident in every small movement, she understood with crushing clarity that her anonymous food drops weren't charity. They were a band-aid on a wound that required surgery. The days blurred together. Monday, 6:47 p.m. Wednesday, 6:47 p.m. Friday, 6:47 p.m. Claire upgraded her offerings each time, leaving more, better, cleaner. She told herself it was enough. She told herself she was making a difference. But Rachel's words haunted her. "You're performing kindness, not actually being kind." And then the rain came. It started as a drizzle that Thursday afternoon and strengthened into a downpour by evening. Claire stood at her window, watching water streak down the glass, and checked her watch. 6:45 p.m. She wondered if the boy would come tonight, if the storm would keep him away. At 6:47 p.m., he appeared. Claire's heart clenched. He was soaked through, his jacket clinging to his thin frame, water dripping from his hair into his eyes. But his movements remained practiced, efficient. He retrieved the food she'd left, examined each item despite the rain, and tucked everything carefully into his backpack. When he zipped the bag with shaking hands and turned toward Division Street, something inside Claire broke open. She couldn't watch anymore. She couldn't perform kindness from 3 stories up while a child walked alone through a storm carrying burdens she couldn't begin to fathom. Her father was right. Rachel was right. Trevor had been right. She'd been going through the motions, emotionally checked out, playing it safe. Not tonight. Claire grabbed her North Face jacket, her phone, her keys. Her hands shook as she locked the door behind her, but she didn't stop. She descended the stairs and stepped into the rain-soaked Portland night, her heart pounding with terror and determination. This time, she wasn't turning back. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling something shift inside you, don't just observe, be part of what happens next. Subscribe now, because this is the kind of story that changes how you see the world, and we need people like you here. The rain soaked through Claire's jacket within minutes, cold water running down her neck as she followed the boy through the darkened streets of southeast Portland. He stayed close to the buildings, his small figure barely visible in the pools of shadow between streetlights. Claire kept her distance, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. What was she doing? What would she even say if he turned around and saw her? They passed closed storefronts on Division Street, a shuttered vintage shop, a dark coffee roaster, a Thai restaurant with its lights dimmed. The boy never looked back, never hesitated, moving with the confidence of someone who'd walked this route 100 times before. After 6 blocks, he turned onto Powell Boulevard, and Claire's suspicions were confirmed. He was heading toward the Riverside Apartments. The building loomed ahead, exactly as it had looked in the Google Street View images, but somehow worse in person. Peeling green paint exposed patches of rotting wood underneath. The porch lights flickered erratically, casting unstable shadows across the entrance. A broken intercom hung at an angle beside the door, wires exposed. The boy pulled open the heavy door and disappeared inside. Claire stopped on the opposite side of the street, rain streaming down her face, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her rational mind screamed at her to turn around, to go home, to stop this before it crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood there for 10 agonizing minutes, watching water pool in the broken concrete of the parking lot, watching a man in a stained jacket emerge from the building and shuffle toward the bus stop. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably Rachel checking in, but she ignored it. Finally, Claire crossed the street. The entrance smelled of mildew and something chemical she couldn't identify. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one of them flickering in a rhythm that made her head hurt. A directory hung on the wall, half the names written in faded marker, the other half blank. She didn't know which apartment was his. Claire walked slowly down the ground floor hallway, her wet shoes squeaking against the linoleum. Most of the doors were closed, some with sounds of televisions or arguments filtering through. She passed 5B, 6B, and then, through the window of apartment 7B, she saw him. Claire froze, her breath catching in her chest. The curtain wasn't fully closed, leaving a 6-inch gap that revealed the interior of the apartment. The boy stood at a small kitchen counter, his back to the window, his wet jacket draped over a chair. His Spider-Man backpack lay open beside him. He was dividing the food. Claire watched, transfixed, as he unwrapped the Subway sandwich she'd left that morning and cut it into 3 precise pieces with a plastic knife. He did the same with the apple, quartering it carefully. The canned soup, he set that aside with 2 others, lined up with their labels facing forward. A small voice broke the silence. "Is that for tonight?" Claire's eyes shifted to see a little girl, no older than 6, sitting at a card table in the corner, a workbook open in front of her. A single bulb hung overhead, casting weak yellow light across her homework. She had the same dark curls as the boy, the same serious expression. "Yeah, Lily," the boy said softly. "We've got sandwich and apple tonight." You want the bigger piece. We should split it even, Lily said, her voice thoughtful beyond her years. That's fair. I already ate. The boy lied, and Claire's throat constricted because she could hear the practiced ease in his voice, the well-worn reassurance meant to protect his sister from the truth. The boy handed Lily her portion on a paper plate, and her whole face lit up with a smile that broke Claire's heart into pieces. Thanks, Marcus, Lily said, taking a careful bite of the sandwich. Marcus. His name was Marcus. Claire watched as Marcus wrapped the remaining food, his portion, though he'd told Lily otherwise, in plastic wrap, and carried it to what looked like a closet near the front door. He opened it to reveal a system that made Claire's chest physically ache. Shelves organized by food type. Canned goods on the left, labeled with dates written in careful child's handwriting. Perishables in a small cooler on the floor. Dried goods, granola bars, crackers, in plastic containers on the right. Everything had a place. Everything had a date. This wasn't improvised. This was weeks, maybe months, of practice. Marcus pulled out a small notebook from the closet and wrote something down. Inventory, Claire realized. He was tracking what they had, what they needed, rationing everything with mathematical precision. How long had he been doing this? How long had this 10-year-old boy been carrying the weight of feeding himself and his sister? When's Mom coming home? Lily asked from the table. Late, Marcus said, closing the closet door. She's got the night shift again. But she left us that mac and cheese in the fridge for tomorrow, remember? Claire's vision blurred with tears. She didn't realize she was crying. The rain continued to hammer down around her, soaking her to the bone, but she couldn't move. She stood outside apartment 7B watching a child play the role of parent with heartbreaking competence, watching a little girl trust her brother to take care of her, watching a system built on scavenged food and careful rationing and lies told to preserve a 6-year-old's sense of security. This wasn't temporary hardship. This was survival. And her wrapped sandwiches, her carefully selected cans of soup, her anonymous gestures of kindness. They were drops in an ocean of needs so vast, she'd been unable to see it from her apartment window, 3 stories up. Marcus returned to the table and sat beside Lily, helping her with what looked like math homework. His wet hair dripped onto the workbook, but he didn't seem to notice. Lily leaned against him, her small body trusting, safe in the presence of her brother who was sacrificing everything to keep that trust intact. Claire backed away from the window, her hands shaking, her mind reeling. She stood in the rain outside the Riverside apartments, Marcus's careful organization playing on loop in her head, the labeled dates, the rationed portions, the inventory notebook, the lie told with practiced ease. She couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after seeing this. But she also had no idea what stepping forward would require of her, what it would cost, or whether she had anything real to offer beyond the performative kindness she'd been hiding behind for weeks. The rain soaked through to her skin, and Claire stood frozen between 2 impossible choices: remain a silent observer to suffering she now understood, or cross a threshold that would demand more of her than she'd ever given anyone. If you were standing outside that window right now, would you knock? Would you walk away? Or would you do something else entirely? Tell us what you'd do in the comments. Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed listening to the rain against her window, seeing Marcus's careful organization system every time she closed her eyes. At 6 a.m., she gave up pretending and got dressed. By 7:30, she was at Trader Joe's loading a cart with groceries. Real groceries, not scraps. Fresh vegetables, chicken breasts, milk, eggs, bread, pasta, sauce, fruit that wasn't bruised. At 8:30 a.m., Claire stood outside apartment 7B with 2 heavy bags in her trembling hands, her heart hammering so violently she thought she might pass out. This was insane. This was invasive. This was... She knocked before she could change her mind. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened 6 inches, stopped by a chain lock, and Marcus's face appeared in the gap. His eyes went wide with recognition, then filled with something that looked like pure terror. Please don't tell anyone, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please. We're not doing anything wrong. Please don't. Marcus, who is it? A woman's voice called from inside, sharp with exhaustion and alarm. The door closed. Claire heard the chain slide free. When it opened again, a woman stood behind Marcus with her hand on his shoulder. She wore a navy blue uniform with a patch that read, PDX janitorial services, and looked like she'd aged a decade beyond her years. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She positioned herself protectively between Marcus and Claire, her body language screaming wariness. "Who are you?" the woman demanded. "What do you want?" Claire's prepared speech evaporated. My name is Claire Donovan. I live in the building on Division Street. The one with." She gestured helplessly at the grocery bags. "I saw Marcus at the dumpster, and I just wanted to." "You followed my son?" The woman's voice went dangerously quiet. "I was worried. I've been leaving food for him. And last night, I needed to know he was okay." "We're fine," the woman said flatly. "Thank you for your concern, but we don't need." "Mom," Marcus interrupted softly, his eyes on the grocery bags. "Maybe we should. Marcus, go check on your sister." "But now." Marcus disappeared into the apartment, throwing one last pleading look at Claire before he went. The woman, his mother, studied Claire with a mixture of suspicion and bone-deep exhaustion. "My name is Nina Torres," she said finally. "And before you call anyone or report anything, you should know that my children are clean, fed, and safe. I work 3 jobs to make sure of that. We're managing. I'm not going to report anything," Claire said quickly. Can I please come in? Just for a minute." Nina hesitated, then stepped aside. 1 minute. The apartment was small, maybe 600 square feet, but immaculately clean. The furniture was worn but arranged with care. Lily's homework corner featured a card table with supplies organized in labeled containers. A small bookshelf held library books arranged by size. The kitchen was spotless despite its dated appliances. This wasn't neglect. This was dignity fighting against impossible odds. Nina remained standing, arms crossed, while Claire set the grocery bags on the counter. "I don't understand what you want," Nina said. "Why are you here?" Claire took a breath. "Because I watched Marcus divide a sandwich into 3 pieces last night. Because I saw him lie to his little sister about already eating. Because I've been leaving food in a dumpster and telling myself it was enough, but it's not. Nothing about this is enough." Nina's defensive posture cracked slightly. "You were watching through the window?" "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have." "How long?" Nina's voice was barely a whisper. "Just last night. After I followed him home." Claire met Nina's eyes. "How long has Marcus been doing this?" For a long moment, Nina didn't answer. Then something in her seemed to collapse inward. She pulled out a chair at the small kitchen table and sat down heavily, gesturing for Claire to do the same. 6 weeks, Nina admitted, her voice hollow. "I found out 3 days ago. He thought he was helping. God, he's 10 years old, and he thought." Her voice broke. The story spilled out in Nina's exhausted, halting words. She'd worked quality control at the Columbia Sportswear factory for 6 years. Good pay, benefits, stability. But 3 months ago, her childcare arrangement fell apart when her usual sitter moved out of state. Nina missed shifts trying to figure out alternatives. Her supervisor was sympathetic at first, then less so. After the 4th absence, they let her go. "I found work fast," Nina said, staring at her hands. "But nothing matched what I was making. Now I clean terminals at PDX overnight, work weekend shifts at the Plaid Pantry on Powell, and do data entry online whenever I can stay awake. I'm pulling maybe 60 hours a week across 3 jobs, and it's still not enough." "Not enough for what?" Claire asked gently. "Rent. The building sold to new ownership 2 months ago. Cascade Property Management. They raised rent from $1,200 to $1,600. $400 overnight. I tried to negotiate, offered to pay the increase over 3 months while I found better work, but they said policy is policy." Claire felt something cold settle in her stomach. "When do you have to?" 2 weeks, Nina interrupted, her voice flat. "They gave me 14 days to come up with $1,600 plus the $800 I still owe from last month, or we're out." The math was brutal. $2,400 in 14 days. On top of everything else. "What about family?" Claire asked. "Friends who could help?" Nina shook her head. "My parents passed when I was young. My ex, Marcus and Lily's father. He left before Lily was born. No child support, no contact. I've got a cousin in California, but she's barely managing herself. As for friends," Nina's laugh was bitter. "You lose touch fast when you're working 3 jobs and raising 2 kids alone." Marcus appeared in the doorway, his protective stance mirroring his mother's earlier posture. Are you going to help us? He asked Claire directly. Or are you going to tell people we need help? Because Mom says those are different things. Claire looked at this 10-year-old boy who'd been scavenging food to ease his mother's burden, who'd lied to protect his sister, who stood now with his small shoulders squared like he was ready to defend his family against whatever came next. I want to help, Claire said. Real help. Not just food in a dumpster. Actual help. Nina's eyes flickered with something dangerous. Hope struggling against the learned instinct that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. People say that a lot, Nina said quietly. They mean well. But help? Usually means a few groceries, and then they disappear, and you're left dealing with the same problems alone. I won't disappear, Claire promised, though she had no idea how she'd keep that promise. We'll figure something out. But even as she said it, reality was already crashing back. Nina worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent. In your city, in your neighborhood, how many families are one paycheck away from this exact situation? Share what you've witnessed in the comments. Claire stood to leave, her mind already racing through possibilities, fundraising, her savings account, calling in favors from friends. It wasn't much, but it was something, a starting point. Thank you for listening, Nina said, pushing herself up from the table. I appreciate the groceries. Really, Nina's knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe, one hand pressed against the wall, her body swaying like someone who'd forgotten how to stand. Claire rushed forward, grabbing Nina's arm to steady her. When's the last time you ate? Claire demanded. I'm fine, Nina said, but her voice was weak. Just tired. I worked a double shift yesterday, and a piece of paper fell from Nina's uniform pocket, fluttering to the floor between them. Claire bent to pick it up automatically, and the words hit her like a physical blow. Final notice. Vacate within 14 days. Rejection of payment plan. The letterhead read, Cascade Property Management, in bold corporate font. Below it, legal language about breach of lease terms, outstanding balances, and the tenant's obligation to surrender the premises. At the bottom, a date stamp, received 5 days ago, which meant they now had 9 days left. Nina, Claire said slowly, her hands shaking as she held the notice. This is serious. Where will you go? Nina straightened, pulling her arm free from Claire's grip. Her exhaustion had been replaced by something harder, more desperate. I don't know yet. I've been calling shelters, but family spaces fill up fast. There's a waiting list for shelters. Claire's voice cracked. You're talking about taking your kids to a homeless shelter? What else am I supposed to do? Nina's composure finally shattered. I've applied to 127 jobs in 3 months. 127. I've had 8 interviews. Every single one ends the same way. They offer minimum wage with no benefits and expect full-time availability, which I can't guarantee because I need childcare. Or they want someone with a bachelor's degree for a position that pays $17 an hour. Do you know what the median rent in Portland is right now? $1,500 for a 1-bedroom. 1 bedroom. Where exactly am I supposed to live with 2 kids on $17 an hour? Claire had no answer. The math was impossible, the system designed to keep people like Nina trapped. We have no family in Oregon, Nina continued, her voice breaking. No savings. No backup plan. My credit is destroyed from medical bills after Lily was born. Even if I could scrape together first and last month's rent somewhere, no landlord will touch me with my eviction on record. Do you understand what that means? Once Cascade files that eviction, I'm done. No one will rent to me. Not in Portland, not anywhere. Marcus appeared in the doorway again, his face pale. Lily stood behind him, her small hand gripping the back of his shirt. They'd heard everything. Can you really help us? Marcus asked, his voice small and precise, like he'd been practicing the question. Or should we start looking for a car to sleep in? The words hung in the air, grotesque in their practicality. This 10-year-old boy was already planning for homelessness, already trying to solve a problem that shouldn't be his to solve. Claire's mind went blank with panic. Her own finances were modest. Freelance work paid her bills, and not much more. She had maybe $3,000 in savings, money she'd been keeping for emergencies. But $3,000 wouldn't cover $2,400 in back rent, plus moving costs, plus security deposits, plus everything else Nina would need to actually escape this situation. She couldn't fix this. She didn't have the resources. She didn't have the connections. She was just a graphic designer who'd followed a kid home from a dumpster because guilt had finally outweighed comfort. but she heard herself say, "I'll figure something out." "Claire," Nina said gently, like she was talking to a child. "You can't." "I'll figure something out," Claire repeated, more firmly this time, even as her internal voice screamed that she was making promises she couldn't keep. "Give me 2 days to make some calls, to research options. There are programs, resources, people who help with this kind of thing. I'll find them." Nina studied her with red-rimmed eyes that had seen too many broken promises to trust easily. "And if you can't?" Claire had no answer for that. "There's something else you should know," Nina said quietly. She looked at Marcus, who shifted uncomfortably. "Tell her." Marcus's cheeks flushed red. "It's not a big deal." "Marcus," he sighed, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small Ziploc bag filled with coins and a few crumpled dollar bills. "I've been collecting bottles and cans before school. There's a recycling place on 82nd that gives you 5 cents per item. I've been doing it since Mom lost her job. It's usually about $40 a month. I put it in the rent envelope so Mom doesn't have to worry as much." Claire felt something crack open in her chest. This child had been waking up early, before school, before his mother knew, to collect recyclables so he could contribute $40 to a problem that required thousands. "Marcus, you don't have to," Claire started. "Yes, I do," Marcus interrupted, his voice suddenly fierce. "Lily doesn't understand yet. She's 6, but I'm 10. I know Mom's trying, but she can't do it alone. So I help. That's what families do." Lily stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Are we going to be okay?" No one answered, because no one knew. Claire left apartment 7B 20 minutes later, the eviction notice folded in her jacket pocket, Nina's exhausted face and Marcus's question looping endlessly in her mind. She had 9 days, to prevent a family's homelessness. 9 days to bridge a gap between their reality and survival that required resources she didn't have, connections she didn't possess, and a systemic overhaul that was far beyond her capacity to provide. She walked through the rain back toward Division Street, her phone already in her hand, searching for rental assistance programs, emergency housing services, anything that might offer a foothold. But with each search result, waitlists, limited funding, eligibility requirements Nina probably didn't meet, the weight of her promise grew heavier. Marcus's question echoed in her skull. "Can you really help us? Or should we start looking for a car to sleep in?" Claire didn't know. She honestly didn't know. This is the moment where watching becomes doing. If you're invested in what happens to Marcus, Nina, and Lily, subscribe now, because the next chapters will show you whether one person's promise can actually change 3 lives, or if good intentions just aren't enough. Claire spent 2 days drowning in research. Her laptop stayed open from dawn until midnight, browser tabs multiplying like a virus, rental assistance programs, emergency housing services, nonprofit organizations, legal aid societies, and Cascade Property Management. What she found made her stomach turn. Cascade Property Management owned 47 buildings across Portland. Their business model was brutally efficient. Acquire older apartment complexes in transitional neighborhoods, raise rents to market rate immediately, evict anyone who couldn't pay, then fill vacancies with tenants desperate enough to accept the terms. Online reviews painted a consistent picture. No negotiation, no compassion, policy over people every single time. They filed 312 evictions last year alone. Claire told Rachel over the phone, her voice hollow. "That's almost 1 per day." "Jesus," Rachel breathed. "Can Nina fight it?" "With what? She can't afford a lawyer. And even if she could, the eviction is legitimate. She owes them money. The system isn't designed to protect people like her. It's designed to extract maximum profit and discard anyone who can't keep up." On the 3rd day, Claire returned to the Riverside apartments. She arrived at 6:30 a.m., before Marcus would leave for school, and found him in the building's recycling area behind the property. He startled when he saw her, nearly dropping the garbage bag he was holding. "Claire," he said, his voice embarrassed. "I didn't think anyone. How long have you been out here?" Claire asked gently. Marcus shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Since 5:30. I have to get here early before other people take the good stuff. There's a guy who comes around 7 who gets really mad if..." He stopped himself. "It doesn't matter." Claire looked at his system. Marcus had organized recyclables into 3 separate bags, aluminum cans in one, plastic bottles in another, glass in the third. A small notebook lay open on the ground, tracking quantities and calculating projected earnings. 47 cans today, Marcus said, following her gaze. That's $2.35. If I can get to 60 by Friday, that's... Marcus, Claire interrupted softly. You shouldn't have to do this. Someone has to help Mom. His voice was matter of fact, like he was stating an obvious truth. She works so hard, but it's never enough. So I help where I can. Later that morning, Claire sat in Nina's apartment while Lily was at school and Marcus was in class. Nina looked even more exhausted than before, her movements slow and unsteady. When did you last eat a full meal? Claire asked. Nina's hesitation was answer enough. Nina. 3 days ago, Nina admitted quietly. Maybe 4. I tell the kids I ate at work that I grabbed something from the airport cafeteria during my shift. They don't question it. Marcus used to, but he stopped asking. Claire's throat tightened. You're starving yourself. I'm prioritizing, Nina corrected. Marcus and Lily need food more than I do. They're growing. I can manage on less. Adults can go longer without. That's not how this works, Claire said, her voice breaking. You can't take care of them if you collapse. I won't collapse. But Nina's hands trembled as she spoke, betraying the lie. Claire's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize with a 503 area code. Hello. Hi. Is this Claire Donovan? A woman's voice, professional but warm. This is Sarah Patterson, Marcus Torres's 4th grade teacher at Bridger Elementary. Nina gave me permission to call you. Claire's pulse quickened. Is Marcus okay? Physically, yes. But I've been concerned for months now. His grades have dropped from A's and B's to C's and D's. He falls asleep during class, not just drowsy, but completely unconscious. I've caught him 3 times this month alone. And his anxiety, Mrs. Patterson paused. He's constantly worried about his mother, about his sister, about things no 10-year-old should be carrying. Did he tell you about the dumpster diving? Yes. 2 weeks ago, during a lesson on food waste and recycling, Marcus raised his hand and said that food waste wasn't a problem if you knew where to look. When I asked what he meant, he explained his routine, checking dumpsters, finding sealed food, taking it home. He said it so casually, like it was a normal part of his life. I was mandated to make a report, but Nina explained the situation, and after a home visit, CPS determined the children were being adequately cared for. But Claire, Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked. That child is drowning. He's taking on adult responsibilities because he thinks he has to save his family, and I don't know how to help him. Neither did Claire. After the call, Nina showed Claire something she'd been tracking on her laptop, a spreadsheet titled Job Search 2024. 127 rows, each representing an application. Company name, position, date applied, outcome. Claire scrolled through the entries. Rejected. No response. Position filled. Rejected. Not qualified. Rejected. No response. 8 interviews scattered among the rejections, each ending with no offer. I had 10 years of quality control experience, Nina said, her voice flat. I'm good at what I do, but I've got a gap in my employment, childcare limitations, and a pending eviction on my record now that Cascade filed the paperwork. Even places that seemed interested go cold when they run my background check. Claire clicked on one of the applications, a data entry position at a healthcare company. Requirements: bachelor's degree, 2 years experience, full-time availability. Pay: $17.50 per hour. That's barely above minimum wage, Claire said. I know, but even those jobs reject me. I'm either overqualified and they think I'll leave, or underqualified because I don't have a degree, or I can't commit to their schedule because I need childcare. It's a trap. Every door closes before I can even walk through it. Claire discovered more that afternoon. Marcus had learned dumpster diving from a classmate named Tyler whose family had experienced homelessness the previous year after his father lost his job. Tyler taught Marcus the rules. Check the food carefully, never dig too deep, stay invisible. Marcus had taken those lessons and built his own system, expanding it over weeks until it became routine. As Claire left the apartment that evening, the full scope of their sacrifice crystallized in her mind. This wasn't about 1 month's rent or 1 eviction notice. This was about a system designed to grind families like Nina's into dust. A system where working 3 jobs still wasn't enough, where job applications disappeared into voids, where children scavenged for food and mothers starved themselves. where every attempt at survival was met with another obstacle designed to push them further down. And Claire, with her modest savings and good intentions, was barely a band-aid on a wound that required surgery. Marcus was collecting bottles before school. Nina was skipping meals. What invisible sacrifices have you seen people make just to survive? And did anyone notice before it was too late? Tell us in the comments. Claire worked her phone like a lifeline. She called every nonprofit contact she'd accumulated through years of freelance design work, the housing advocacy groups, the family service organizations, the emergency assistance programs. Rachel connected her with a housing advocate named Jennifer who specialized in eviction defense. Her father called back within an hour of her voicemail. "How much do you need?" Robert Donovan asked, skipping pleasantries. "Dad, I can't just ask you for." "How much, Claire?" She told him about Nina, about Marcus, about the impossible math. Her father was quiet for a long moment. "I can contribute $2,000, he said finally. "It's what I have liquid right now without touching retirement accounts." "Will that help?" Claire's eyes burned with tears. "Yes. God, yes. Thank you. I'm proud of you," her father said quietly, for finally stepping up. But $2,000 was only the beginning. Claire made an appointment with Cascade Property Management's main office, a sterile building in Beaverton with corporate art on the walls and motivational posters about excellence and integrity. The property manager, a man named David Chun, listened to Claire's pitch with the expression of someone who'd heard it 1,000 times before. "Ms. Donovan, I understand your concern for Ms. Torres," he said, his tone professionally sympathetic in a way that felt rehearsed. "But Cascade has clear policies regarding late payments and lease violations. We can't make exceptions." "She's willing to pay," Claire insisted. "She just needs time to." She's had time. 3 months, in fact. And now she owes $2,400 in back rent plus late fees. "Our policy is consistent across all properties. If we make an exception for one tenant, we'd have to make exceptions for everyone." "She has 2 children," Claire said, her voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. "If you evict her, where are they supposed to go?" David's expression didn't change. "That's not Cascade's responsibility, Ms. Donovan. We're a property management company, not a social service agency. I sympathize with Ms. Torres's situation, but business is business." Claire left the meeting feeling physically ill. That evening, she sat with her laptop and did the math. Even if Nina could pay the back rent and avoid eviction, she'd still need to move. The rent increase made staying impossible. Moving meant first month's rent at a new place, $1,500 minimum. Last month's rent, $1,500. Security deposit, $1,500. Moving costs, $300. And the $2,400 to clear the debt at Riverside. Total, $7,200. Plus cushion for unexpected costs. Call it $7,500. Claire had $3,000 in savings. Her father offered $2,000. That left $2,500 short. She launched a GoFundMe at midnight, her fingers trembling as she typed, "Help the Torres family avoid homelessness." She wrote Nina's story as honestly as she could without stripping away her dignity. Single mother. 3 jobs. 2 kids. Rent increase they couldn't absorb. System failure. 9 days to find $7,500 or they lose everything. Claire shared it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Rachel shared it. Her father shared it. Friends shared it. In 48 hours, they raised $1,200. $1,200. From 37 donors. Most contributions were $20 or $50. People giving what they could, messages of support and encouragement attached. "Praying for this family. Hang in there, Nina." Shared with my network. It was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. And it wasn't nearly enough. On day 6, Nina got a call that should have been good news. Intel's Hillsborough campus wanted her to come in for an interview. A billing coordination position with full benefits and $25 per hour. Real money. Real stability. "That's amazing," Claire said when Nina told her. "The interview is in 3 weeks," Nina replied, her voice hollow. "And the campus is in Hillsborough. That's a 40-minute drive. My car barely runs. I've been taking the bus to my jobs. If I get this position, I need reliable transportation, which means car payments I can't afford. And even if I get the job, it doesn't start for at least a month after the interview. We'll be evicted in 3 days." Everything was timing wrong, resources unavailable at the exact moment they were needed. Marcus found Claire on the apartment building's front steps that evening, where she sat staring at her phone and the stalled GoFundMe campaign. "Does Lily know?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Know what? That we might lose our home. That we might have to," his voice cracked. "Mom keeps telling her everything's fine. That we're just going to move to a new place soon. But Lily doesn't understand we don't have a new place. She thinks it's an adventure." Claire's chest ached. Nina had been protecting her 6-year-old daughter from the truth, maintaining normalcy, while privately unraveling. "Your mom is trying to keep Lily from being scared," Claire said gently. "But what happens when there's nothing left to protect her from?" Marcus asked. "When we're living in our car, or at a shelter, and Lily finally understands. Won't that be worse?" Claire had no answer. Because he was right. That night, Claire sat in Nina's apartment watching her interact with Lily. They were coloring together at the card table, Lily chattering about her day at school, her best friend Emma, the art project they were doing, the field trip coming up next month. "Can I bring my stuffed animals to the new place?" Lily asked, coloring carefully inside the lines of a butterfly. "Of course, sweetie," Nina said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "We'll bring everything important. Will I still go to the same school?" Nina hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "We'll figure it out." Lily accepted this without question, returning to her coloring. But Claire saw the way Nina's hands trembled, the way her eyes filled with tears. She blinked away before her daughter could notice. After Lily went to bed, Nina collapsed on the couch, her professional mask finally dropping. "I'm going to lose them," she whispered. "Not permanently. I'm not unfit. CPS won't take them. But we'll end up in a shelter, and those places separate families sometimes. Or we'll end up in my car, and someone will see and report it, and then I'll have to prove I can provide stable housing, which I can't. So they'll go to foster care temporarily while I—" She stopped, her breath coming in gasps. "I'm doing everything right, and I'm still failing them." Claire sat beside her, her own sense of helplessness crushing. 7 days remained. The GoFundMe sat at $1,200. She'd called every resource, mobilized every contact, and the gap between what Nina needed and what Claire could provide felt wider than ever. Claire raised $1,200 in 2 days, but needed $7,500. If you've ever watched a fundraiser stall before reaching its goal, what happened? Did you contribute? Did you share it? Or did you scroll past? Be honest in the comments. Claire's father called on day 7 with an offer that should have felt like salvation. "I talked to your Uncle Mike," Robert said. "Between the two of us, we can cover the remaining amount. All of it. The $6,300 you still need." Claire's breath caught. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "There's a condition," Robert continued, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "I'll write the check, but Nina needs to agree to let me oversee her finances for 6 months. Nothing invasive, just reviewing her budget, helping her make better decisions, ensuring she doesn't end up in this situation again." Claire's stomach dropped. "Dad, she's not bad with money. The system is. I understand that. But if I'm investing this much, I need to know it won't be wasted. 6 months of financial oversight. That's the deal." Claire drove to the Riverside Apartments, her father's offer sitting heavy in her chest. She found Nina in the apartment, sorting through belongings and trying to decide what they could take and what they'd have to leave behind when they had to move. "My father and uncle can cover the rest," Claire said without preamble. "All $6,300. Nina's head snapped up, her expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and then suspicion. "What's the catch?" Claire explained Robert's condition. With each word, she watched Nina's face transform from cautious optimism to something that looked like physical pain. "He wants to oversee my finances," Nina repeated slowly, her voice tight. "Like I'm a child who can't be trusted with money. It's not like that. It's exactly like that." Nina's hands clenched into fists. "I worked 10 years in quality control. I managed our household on a single income for a decade. I paid every bill on time until the system collapsed around me. And now your father, who's never met me, who knows nothing about my life, wants to review my budget and help me make better decisions." "Nina, he's trying to help." "No, Claire. He's trying to control. There's a difference." Nina's voice cracked. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? To have a stranger tell you they'll save your family, but only if you prove you're responsible enough to deserve saving. I'm not irresponsible. I'm broke. Those are not the same thing. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression guarded. He'd clearly been listening. Mom. Not now, Marcus. But if it helps. I said not now. Nina's tone was sharper than Claire had ever heard it, and Marcus flinched. Later, Claire found Marcus sitting on the building's front steps, his Spider-Man backpack beside him. She sat down, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. We'll figure it out ourselves, Marcus said finally, his voice small but determined. Tell your dad thank you, but we don't need his money if it comes with rules. Marcus, your mom is just proud, he interrupted. I know, but pride doesn't keep us from being homeless, does it? His voice broke. I heard her crying last night after Lily fell asleep. She thinks she's failing us. But she's not. The whole world is failing her, and everyone keeps acting like it's her fault. Claire had no response to that. The Intel interview happened the next morning. Nina returned to the apartment, looking simultaneously hopeful and defeated. They loved me, she told Claire. The hiring manager said I was exactly what they needed. Great experience, professional, detail-oriented, everything they wanted. That's amazing, Claire said. The position doesn't start for 3 weeks. Nina's voice was hollow. Orientation, onboarding, background checks, standard procedure. Which means even if I get the job, I won't see a paycheck for 5 weeks. We have 4 days until eviction. The timing was cruel. A life-changing opportunity arriving just weeks too late to matter. Stay with me, Claire blurted out. Temporarily. Until the Intel job starts and you can get on your feet. My apartment isn't big, but we can make it work. The kids can share the bedroom. You can take the couch. Claire, your apartment is 500 square feet. I know, but for people can't live in 500 square feet. And even if we could, I can't. Nina stopped herself, her expression softening. You've already done so much. You've maxed out your credit card buying us groceries. Claire went very still. How did you know about? Marcus saw the receipt in the trash. He showed me. Claire, you've spent over $800 on groceries for us in the last week. $800 you don't have, judging by the credit card statement he accidentally saw. It's fine, Claire said weakly. It's not fine. You're drowning yourself trying to save us, and it's not sustainable. What happens when your credit card is maxed and you can't pay your own rent? Then we'll both be homeless, and my kids will blame themselves for. Nina's voice cracked. This isn't your burden to carry. Then whose is it? Claire demanded. Because it shouldn't be yours either. You didn't choose any of this. The system failed you, and now everyone expects you to just. What? Figure it out? Accept humiliating conditions for help? Be grateful for charity that strips away your dignity. They were both crying now, the weight of impossible choices crushing them both. That evening, Lily asked the question Nina had been dreading. She was sitting at the card table with her homework, Marcus beside her, when she set down her pencil and looked up at her mother with eyes too old for 6 years. Mommy, are we going to be okay? The apartment went silent. Marcus froze. Nina's breath caught. Of course, baby, Nina said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. We're going to be just fine. Emma at school said her mom heard we might have to move to a shelter. She said shelters are where people go when they don't have homes anymore. Lily's voice was small, confused. Do we not have a home anymore? Nina crossed the room and pulled Lily into her arms, holding her daughter tight, while Marcus watched with an expression that looked like his heart was breaking in real time. We will always have each other, Nina whispered. And that means we'll always have a home. Okay, Lily said, but she was crying too. Claire stood in the doorway watching this family fracture under pressure they shouldn't have to endure, watching a mother try to shield her children from a reality that was closing in fast, watching a system designed to help instead strip away dignity and offer salvation wrapped in shame. For days remained. Robert's offer sat on the table with conditions Nina couldn't stomach. The GoFundMe had stalled at $1,200. Claire's credit card was maxed. Nina's Intel job was weeks away. And every solution came wrapped in impossible trade-offs that demanded more than they gave. Robert offered money with conditions. Nina felt humiliated. Was he wrong to attach strings, or was she wrong to let pride matter more than her kid's stability? Pick a side in the comments. The knock on apartment 7B came at 9:15 a.m. on day 3, 72 hours before eviction. Nina answered to find a woman in her mid-40s holding a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of professional concern. Nina Torres? The woman asked. Yes. My name is Amanda Vasquez. I'm with Child Protective Services. May I come in? The blood drained from Nina's face. CPS? Why, what's this about? We received an anonymous report expressing concern for your children's welfare. Nothing serious, Amanda added quickly, seeing Nina's panic. Just some questions about their living situation, and she consulted her notes. Reports that your son has been scavenging food from dumpsters? Behind Nina, Marcus appeared, his face white with terror. Lily stood behind him, confused. Who reported us? Nina demanded, her voice shaking. Reports are confidential, Miss Torres. But I need to conduct a home visit and speak with your children. It's standard procedure. Claire arrived 20 minutes later to find Nina barely holding herself together while Amanda Vasquez inspected the apartment and asked Marcus and Lily gentle but probing questions about their meals, their mother's work schedule, whether they felt safe. This is insane, Claire told Nina quietly while Amanda spoke with the children in the other room. Your kids are clean, healthy, loved. Anyone can see. It doesn't matter what anyone can see, Nina interrupted, her voice hollow. If CPS decides to investigate, they can remove Marcus and Lily temporarily while they assess the situation. And homelessness, even impending homelessness, can be grounds for removal. Do you understand? Even if we find housing tomorrow, this investigation could take my children away. Amanda emerged 30 minutes later with a neutral expression. Everything appears adequate, she said carefully. Your children are well cared for. However, given your current housing instability, I'll need to schedule a follow-up visit within 2 weeks. If your living situation hasn't improved by then, we may need to discuss temporary placement options until you're in stable housing. After Amanda left, Nina collapsed on the couch, her body shaking with silent sobs. Who would report us? She whispered. Who would do this? Claire's mind raced. Someone who knew about Marcus's dumpster diving. Someone who knew enough to make a specific, damaging claim. Someone at the riverside who'd watched the situation unfold? Marcus approached Claire that afternoon, his expression guilty. It was Mrs. Patterson, he admitted quietly. My teacher. She asked me 3 days ago why I kept falling asleep in class, and I told her everything. About the dumpster, about helping Mom, about the eviction. She said she was proud of me for helping my family, but that she had to report it. She said it was the law. Claire's anger flared, then died. Mrs. Patterson was a mandated reporter. She'd had no choice. The system had backed her into a corner just like it had backed Nina. That evening, Claire checked the GoFundMe campaign on her phone, something she'd been doing obsessively despite knowing the donations had stalled. Her breath caught. The total had jumped from $1,200 to $6,000. What the hell? Claire whispered, scrolling through the donor list. Multiple small donations had come in overnight, but the largest, $4,800, came from a single anonymous donor listed only as Anonymous, Portland, Oregon. But when Claire clicked through to the payment details visible only to her as the campaign organizer, she saw the name on the credit card authorization. Cascade Property Management. Her blood ran cold. Nina, Claire called, her voice strangled. You need to see this. Nina crossed the room, looked at the screen, and went very still. Why would they? I don't know, Claire said. But this isn't generosity. Companies like Cascade don't just donate $4,800 to people they're evicting out of the goodness of their hearts. As if summoned by the mention of their name, Claire's phone rang. The caller ID showed a 503 number she recognized from her previous visit to their office. Hello, Ms. Donovan? This is David Chun from Cascade Property Management. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Claire's hand tightened around the phone. What do you want? I wanted to follow up on our previous conversation about Ms. Torres, David said, his tone professionally pleasant. I've been reviewing her case, and I believe we may have found a mutually beneficial solution. Would it be possible to schedule a meeting? Tomorrow morning, perhaps? I'd like to discuss an arrangement that could help Ms. Torres and her children. What kind of arrangement? Claire demanded. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, if possible, with both you and Ms. Torres present. Let's say 10 a.m. at our Beaverton office. We saw your donation to the GoFundMe, Claire said. What are you trying to? I think you'll find our proposal quite reasonable, David interrupted smoothly. See you tomorrow at 10? He hung up before Claire could respond. Nina stood frozen, her face pale. This is wrong. Everything about this is wrong. Maybe it's legitimate, Claire said, but she didn't believe it. Maybe they saw the campaign and felt. Cascade Property Management doesn't feel anything, Nina said. They're a corporation. They filed 312 evictions last year. They don't suddenly grow a conscience. She grabbed Claire's phone, staring at the GoFundMe total. They donated exactly the amount we needed. Exactly. That's not coincidence. Marcus appeared in the doorway. What's happening? Nothing, baby, Nina said automatically, but her voice cracked. Don't lie to me, Marcus said, his voice stronger than Claire had ever heard it. I'm not Lily. I understand what's happening. What do they want? Nina looked at her 10-year-old son. This child who'd been carrying adult burdens for months, who'd scavenged food and collected bottles and protected his sister and never once complained, and the careful facade she'd been maintaining finally shattered. I don't know, she admitted. But whatever it is, it won't be free. That night, Claire lay awake in her apartment, David Chin's words playing on loop in her mind. A mutually beneficial arrangement. What did that mean? What could Cascade possibly want from Nina that would be worth $4,800? Her phone sat on her nightstand, the GoFundMe page still open, showing $6,000. Enough to cover the back rent and moving costs. Enough to save this family from homelessness. But that money came with a name attached that turned salvation into something that felt like a trap. The landlord who'd been ruthlessly pursuing Nina's eviction had suddenly become her largest benefactor. That wasn't generosity. That was strategy. That was leverage. That was a chess move in a game Claire was only beginning to understand. And tomorrow morning, she'd find out exactly what piece they were trying to capture. The landlord who's evicting them just donated $4,800. That's not generosity. That's a chess move. What do you think Cascade Property Management wants in exchange? Comment Part 2. If you need to know what happens in that meeting, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because if this story ends here, we'll never know if Marcus, Nina, and Lily make it out of this nightmare, or if the system wins again.